This is part 2 to the ballot question 3 open primary and ranked choice voting video I made. If you missed that, please go check it out. In the previous video, I went through each step of the election process from open primary to general election, and I figured I would just give my thoughts about the actual ballot measure. So let's start with the idea of an open primary. I personally see advantages and pitfalls to how it will play out, and I'll get into both. But my biggest hope is to see an increase in primary turnout, as we have abysmally low turnout for the partisan primaries as they stand now, where the major two candidates are decided by a fraction of our voting population. And because of media coverage bias and major campaign financing, other campaigns, whether inside the major parties or outside, receive little to no attention, to the point where voters rarely realize that they have other options to choose from. I feel that the most eligible voters avoid the primaries for a few reasons. The number of people registered outside the major parties has steadily increased over the years, and combined minor party and nonpartisan registration has surpassed both registered Democrats and Republicans individually. I don't think people want to change their registration simply to participate in the primary, no matter how easy it may be to switch back and forth. Those outside the two parties have little faith in those two parties, and more importantly, their own ability to change what is usually an establishment or incumbent candidate, or see no point to show up to support a seemingly de facto winner. I've seen comments from Democrats, Republicans, even independents as to why non-Democrats or non-Republicans shouldn't have any right to decide who wins in their primary. Or this crazy conspiracy that Dems will vote for the worst Republican or Republicans will vote for the worst Dem to sabotage the better candidates, which literally makes no sense. But ultimately, as far as the main party-sponsored, donor-backed Democratic or Republican candidates continuing to dominate, if that's actually your concern, nothing fundamentally changes with an open primary. If anything, you're actually increasing the chance of more voters having access to vote for your candidate and advance them to the general. What an open primary will do is create an opportunity for voters to advance a candidate that may have lost their respective party primary to move on to the general election. Then the ranked choice voting aspect during the general will decide who really has the most support among the majority of voters. In my example primary election from the previous video, I showed what I see as the most ideal outcome, where a single Democrat and Republican and 3 minor party candidates advance to the general. But maybe there's a candidate running as a Democrat that leans further left than the establishment candidate, or a Republican candidate leaning more center, or yes, even further right. Those candidates will have a higher likelihood of making it to the general election ballot, even if they receive less votes in comparison to the dominant Democrat or Republican, but were still able to surpass any other candidates running in the primary and secure one of the top 5 spots. Which also does bring me to really my only concern. What we could realistically see is a general election ballot with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans with a single spot for a minor party, or maybe none at all. That's without even going into the nuances of how difficult it is for a minor party candidate to obtain ballot access or media coverage in our state in the first place. But that is why an increased voter turnout in the primary will be so fundamental. If you really want your preferred candidate to show up in the general election, be it establishment Democrat or Republican, quote unquote fringe Democrat or Republican, or minor party candidate, it will be paramount to vote in the primary. Now, to get into ranked choice voting, I came up with a sports analogy. Let's say you have a favorite football team, but you were asked to rank your top 4 choices for who you want to win the Super Bowl. So at the end of your team's conference, if they don't advance, who are you rooting for to make it next? If that team fails to advance, who are you rooting for after then? Then maybe by the time the Super Bowl comes around, there's one team that you don't love, but you can at least tolerate, and perhaps the other you loathe entirely. Will you cheer on the tolerable team and hope they beat the loathsome one? This is essentially the beauty of how ranked choice voting works. We all want our most preferred candidate to win, but it gives you the ability to say, if they don't, I at least want this person I still align with to, or this other person if that choice doesn't work, and so on and so forth. Not only that, it allows you to vote your conscience for smaller candidates and say, this is the person who I believe is closest to my values, without the fear of what people call an election spoiler, or wasting your vote, or taking away another candidate's. Because if your preferred candidate doesn't make it, you can still choose that other candidate to stop the ones that you dislike. If you just don't like ranking, or for some reason can't understand it, then just don't rank. You are not being forced to rank candidates, but are encouraged to do so that your vote carries on to either elect the next best option in your opinion, or again, stop whoever you loathe from winning. Another thing I've been seeing a lot of is, oh, well, this measure is being funded by a millionaire and out-of-state organizations. I find that argument to be so disingenuous, because while that may be the case, you can say the exact same thing about almost every candidate on the ballot every election. Major campaigns on both sides of the aisle are being paid for by millionaires, billionaires, corporations, organizations, special interest group, and very few people seem to bat an eye. But when someone does run on a policy of getting money's stranglehold on politics loosened, or simply doesn't accept those donations, you'll likely never know it because the major campaigns will outspend them for nonstop ads across all media platforms that grassroots campaigns are unable to spend frivolously on. What I also find most interesting in this is that it seems that it's a singular issue that both the Democrat and Republican establishment are able to agree on, that they do not support this measure. Ask yourself why the Nevada Democratic Party and Nevada GOP have been voicing opposition, including sitting office holders in their parties like Senators Cortez Masto and Rosen, Representative Amode, Senate Majority Leader Canizaro, and Speaker Yeager, all under a guise of ranked choice voting being too confusing for voters. I think their real concern is they're afraid of losing their grip on our state for the reasons I've already stated. They're essentially aligning together and saying Nevada voters are too dumb to understand ranking candidates. And for me, that's more than enough reason to say yes to question 3.